grandest battles in history are often between fact and fiction. This is a dramatization of two fakes that shook the world. A radio play that convinced America the Martians were invading, and the publication of the diaries of Adolf Hitler, the biggest gamble in the history of journalism. It is October the 30th, 1938. In Europe, Adolf Hitler has just invaded Czechoslovakia. In Britain, the world's first radar system begins full operation. In America, the House Un-American Activities Committee is established to investigate behavior deemed alien to the American way. The United States of America is listening to the radio. It's the day before Halloween. 10 million radio sets have been sold since last year. Radio is a phenomenon, a source of live news coverage. Last year, it brought listeners live reports of President Roosevelt's second inaugural speech and the Hindenburg airship disaster. And its entertainment profile is also growing.
I may tell you a ghost story.
With famous movie and musical stars regularly heard on the air.
Do you think you can afford it? Oh,
Right, from the top.
At a radio studio in New York, Howard Koch, a 35-year-old lawyer turned playwright, is feverishly completing the rewrites for a play he has been working on for the last 6 days.
While he reads it, let me remind you that we are speaking...
The deadline is looming.
Princeton, New Jersey.
Mrs. Delaney, an elderly New Yorker, has just finished her evening meal and is looking forward to listening to the radio.
That's very good. Let's take it from there. I think you've got that other bit.
Okay.
While Koch works, actors, technicians, and musicians around him are rehearsing. They have only 30 minutes until their live broadcast. But their 23-year-old director and star is still not happy with script or performance.
All right, we're going to take this from the top, and we're going to take this from the top, all right? All right, Frank?
77 miles away, Maisie Curtis has just said goodnight to her fiancé.
Well, hello,
Hey,
Maisie. How was your date? Were you parking?
Mind your own.
Maisie and her two sisters settle down to a pleasant evening by the radio.
What is this you've dealt me here?
It's what you got dealt.
Don't look at my cards. Pop, you want to come listen to Charlie McCarthy?
From the top. Right. Okay.
This is the Mercury Theatre on the air.
Handed Professor Pearson a message.
Every Sunday evening for the past 17 weeks, this company has broadcast adaptations of literary classics,
All I need from you is just...
including Julius Caesar and Oliver Twist.
Just a tad bit. Remember, this is something that has never happened before in the whole history of humanity, and you're the one. All right?
Right, okay. From the top.
From the top.
Just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Someone has just handed Professor
The company
Pearson
was created last year by the 36-year-old producer John Houseman.
I'm sorry, John. Just let me finish. The more you interrupt me, the longer it's going to take. John, please let him finish. All right, Carl, we're going to take...
And a brilliant writer-director-actor from Wisconsin, Orson Welles.
I've never missed anything. All right, Howard, there's only one thing about this monologue. I think you have too many synonyms for the alien craft. It should just be a thing. All right. Frank, one more time from the top.
Yet to be a famous name, Welles is already turning heads in the theatrical world. he has been writing and directing from the age of 10. Both his parents had died by the time he was 16, giving the young prodigy a drive and independence that was to see him conquer the New York stage with his Macbeth by the age of 21, only 2 years ago.
Okay, in the beginnings of the 20th century...
Last week, Wells' company presented Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne.
I got the first scene, sir.
No, scrub that.
This week,
Maybe the,
in 10 minutes' time,
I don't know. Have you got that?
they will start performing their adaptation of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. Within 2 hours, Orson Welles will be a household name. Published in England 40 years ago, the science fiction fantasy describes how an alien invasion destroys most of Surrey and parts of London before a bacteria finally kills off the Martian invaders. The novelist H.G. Wells, now 72, sold the US radio rights to Orson Welles earlier this year.
No, faster, just a little bit
Howard
faster.
Koch has been working for the Mercury Theatre for a month. The young writer is paid $75 a week, a sum Wells and Houseman have balked at.
All right, from the top, please.
To supplement the meagre wage, Koch has managed to claim the copyright in all his scripts. Presented with this project last weekend, he is worried.
I realized I could use practically nothing but the author's idea of a Martian invasion and his description of their appearance and their machines. In short, I was being asked to do an almost entirely original hour-length play in 6 days.
Last Sunday, Koch had begged Houseman to find another novel.
John?
What's the problem?
It's Howard. I think we got a problem.
Yep.
Yeah,
No, it's hard.
I've been reading the novel. I don't think I can do the play.
This has to be done, Howard. It has to be done. This is Orson's...
Well, there's no character.
Though he had transported the story to modern America, the visual nature of this Victorian novel would require a complete rewrite.
Look, maybe I should come over.
Well, I guess I could try.
After the Mercury Theatre's broadcast that night, Wells announced War of the Worlds as next week's story. There was no escaping the Martians.
Okay, goodbye.
See, I got the bit about ladies, gentlemen.
Okay, no. The 6 days before the broadcast were a nightmare of scenes written and rewritten, and between frantic phone calls and pages speeding back and forth to the studio, and all the while that Sunday deadline staring me in the face.
Last Tuesday, only 5 nights before the broadcast tonight, Koch and his secretary, Anne Froelich, worked through the night.
It's okay. It's
Yeah?
moving slowly, but we're getting there.
Well, we'll speed it up a bit, Howard. When I finally got there, around 2 in the morning, things were better. They were beginning to have fun, laying waste to the state of New Jersey. Wednesday at sunrise, the script was finished.
Good. How's Orson?
He's okay. Orson's okay. A little anxious. We need to get this ready, though.
And John Howard.
3 days ago, Wells saw the script for the first time.
It's just not right. There's a lot of good stuff in there. There's a lot.
He made a radical suggestion. The story should be presented as a series of news flashes.
I want this to be like a news broadcast, like the Hindenburg disaster. I want this to be people confused, not sure what's going to happen.
Sure, it's just we got 3 days to do this, Orson.
Well,
Wells realized radio had become the voice of unchallengeable truth.
what makes it work? There should be like far...
We had a lot of radio nuts on as commentators at this period. People who wanted to keep us out of European entanglements. And a fascist priest called Father Coughlin. And people believed everything they heard on the radio.
Are you with me?
Sure.
Orson Welles was probably not aware that when he was 11 in 1926, Father Ronald Knox had presented a BBC radio show called Broadcasting the Barricades, suggesting that an angry mob were destroying London and attacking Big Ben with mortars. Knox's fictional play had created a dangerous panic reaction across Great Britain. Orson has been working on the show since noon. This morning, he was rehearsing his stage production of Danton's Death. He is eager to complete War of the Worlds and to get back to rehearsing tonight. As usual, he drinks a flagon of pineapple juice and prepares for the start. Mrs. Delaney tunes into the NBC network for The Chase and Sanborn Hour, a mixture of music and comedy from Eddie Bergen and his ventriloquist dummy, Charlie McCarthy.
While he reads it, let me remind you that we are speaking to you from the observatory.
Davidson Taylor, the CBS executive in charge of Wells' show, is nervous. He is still not convinced War of the Worlds is anything but an audience loser.
It's not good, John. Hey, John, I'm worried. Look,
Mercury Theatre on the Air is struggling, only ever getting 4% of the listening audience. Their competitor in this slot, The Chase and Sanborn Hour, averages 37%.
Wait, hold on. Oh, God.
Maisie Curtis and her family are happy to be free of the usual dire news from Europe. In the last weeks, listeners have followed the rising threat of Nazism. Only 4 weeks ago, Adolf Hitler invaded Czechoslovakia, and America is bracing itself for war. This evening, all is calm. So far. 8 p.m. The show begins.
The Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theatre on the Air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
Exhausted, Kosh heads for home.
Ladies and gentlemen, the director of the Mercury Theatre and star of these broadcasts, Orson Welles.
We now know that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's.
And yet as mortal as his own. We know now that as human beings busy themselves about their various concerns,
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the
So far, the broadcast has made it clear that this is fiction. But most radio listeners have been tuned into other channels, like NBC's Chase and Sanborn Hour. The comedy has finished for the moment, and Nelson Eddy is singing. This is usually the time people like to start channel hopping for something new.
We now return you to music of Ramon Raquello, playing for you in the Meridian Room of the Park Plaza Hotel, situated in downtown New York.
I am gonna go. I'm gonna ask
For the next 7 minutes, listeners start turning their dials.
And now a tune that never loses favor. The ever-popular Stardust, Raymond Raquello and his orchestra.
The War of the Worlds now takes the form of a program of dance music, provided by the studio orchestra in various guises, constantly interrupted by news flashes.
Ladies and gentlemen, following on the news given in our bulletin a moment ago, the Government Meteorological Bureau has requested the large observatories of the country to keep an astronomical watch on any further disturbances occurring on the planet Mars.
As more and more listeners switch over to War of the Worlds, Wells's usual audience of 2 million grows to over 6, listening avidly as the Mercury Theatre describes a disturbance on Mars. Most listeners have no idea they are listening to actors.
Everything okay?
Orson Welles is now introduced as Professor Pearson, an astronomer.
Although that's the popular conjecture of those who imagine Mars to be inhabited. From a scientific viewpoint, the stripes are merely the result of atmospheric conditions peculiar to the planet.
Then you're quite convinced, as a scientist, that living intelligence as we know it does not exist on Mars.
I'd say the chances against it are 1,000 to 1.
Just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Someone has just handed Professor Pearson a message. While he reads it, let me remind you that we are speaking to you from the observatory in Princeton, New Jersey, where we are interviewing the world-famous astronomer, Professor Pearson.
92 stations are relaying Wells's drama across the whole of the United States. And more people are joining Mrs. Delaney, Maisie and her family, glued to their radios as the ominous meteor lands on Earth.
From American observatories. Now, nearer home, comes a special bulletin from Trenton, New Jersey.
Paul, what's going on?
It is reported that at 8:50 p.m., a huge flaming object, believed to be a meteorite, fell on a farm in the neighborhood of Grover's Mill, New Jersey, 22 miles from Trenton.
On Monday last week, Howard Koch had been driving along the Hudson River on his day off. He pulled into a gas station and bought a map of New Jersey. He needed to find a place for the first Martian ship to land.
Back in New York, starting to work, I spread out the map and closed my eyes and put down the pencil point. It happened to fall on Grover's Mill. I liked the sound. It had an authentic ring.
The CBS censor had not asked for geographic locations to be fictional.
Can you hear it now?
Listeners are glued to their radio sets as they hear the reports of a metallic meteor landing only minutes away from their homes.
I say, do you still think it's a meteor, Professor?
What to think? The metal casing is definitely extraterrestrial. Not found on this Earth. Friction with the Earth's atmosphere usually tears holes in a meteorite. This thing is smooth and you can see its cylindrical
Just a minute.
shape.
Something's happening. Ladies and gentlemen, this is terrific. This end of the thing is beginning to flake off. The top is beginning to rotate like a screw, and the thing must be hollow. Move it! Keep back there! Keep back there! Keep those men back! Keep back there! Keep those idiots back! Take off! The top look out there! Ladies and gentlemen, this is the terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. Wait a minute. Someone's calling someone or something. I can see turning out of that black hole two luminous discs. The eyes, it might be a face, might be almost but heavens, something wriggling.
Within 10 minutes, the unrest is growing out of proportion. For the people of Grover's Mill, this is the end. The Martians are here. A team of local hunters is dispatched to see off any aliens. And the town's volunteer part-time fire chief spends the next 2 hours responding to frantic reports of non-existent fires from townsfolk convinced the Martians are attacking.
Just one moment, please. At least 40 people, including 6 state troopers, lie dead in a field east of the village of Grover's Mill.
Baby,
their bodies burned and
if we're gonna die, we're gonna die together. With my brother in Pennsylvania and Mama and the whole family there.
We're not gonna die. We're gonna get out of here. Come on, let's get out of here. Come on, come on. Let's go, honey.
I have been requested by the governor of New Jersey to place the
A
county...
farming couple in Grover's Mill believe they are going to die.
Princeton and
Sweetheart, we gotta move on. We gotta get moving. Come on, let's go.
I want to take Mama's plate.
Come on.
In their panic to escape a Martian death, the couple are losing control.
Get in.
Don't worry, honey. Not like we're gonna need it anymore.
What? It's standing on legs, actually rearing up on a sort of metal framework. Now it's reaching above the trees and
The panic grows, and the fear spreads from the East Coast to West.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have a grave announcement to make. Incredible as it may seem, both the observations of science and the evidence of our eyes lead to the inescapable assumption that those strange beings who landed in the Jersey farmlands tonight are the vanguard of an invading army from the planet Mars.
My wife and I were driving through Northern California when the broadcast came over our car radio. There was no escape. All we could think of was to get back to L.A. to see our children once more.
Men armed with rifles and machine guns pitted against a single fighting machine.
In their panic, the couple don't realize they're running out of gas until their car stutters to a halt. Empty.
Crushed and trampled to death under the metal.
We just sat there holding hands, expecting any minute to see those Martian monsters appear over the tops of the trees.
Control of the middle section of New Jersey and has effectively cut the state through its center.
Davidson Taylor. Yes.
CBS executive Davidson Taylor receives a telephone call. He is informed of the mayhem on the streets of New York and all across the United States.
To do with this?
This is the first time anyone at the studio has any idea what is happening outside.
Oh, you're joking. You can't be serious.
This is Newark, New Jersey. This is Newark, New Jersey. Warning. Poisonous black smoke pouring in from Jersey marshes.
That's Massachusetts.
Girls, wait. Pa, where you going? Pa? Pa?
Automobiles use route 7.
23, 24.
Maisie and her family are desperate.
Hold hands.
Like so many people across the country now, her father calls on his faith to get them through the crisis.
Pray, girls, pray. Pray.
Mrs. Delaney is also praying. Hearing Wells describing the poisonous Martian gas, she decides to make her room airtight with wet towels.
Where are you?
My plan was to stay in my room and hope I wouldn't suffocate before the gas blew away.
By now, over 1 million people are panicking by their radios and spreading the panic to their neighbors. Taylor is aware that the CBS switchboard is jammed with calls and that the New York police want to shut the play down. He orders an announcement to be made.
Listening to a CBS presentation of Orson Welles and the Mercury Theatre on the Air in an original dramatization of The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Performance will continue after a brief intermission. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.
Despite 3 similar announcements, it is too late. Police find families huddled in streets in New York. Hysteria has even led to some reported sightings of the alien machines. A terrified woman phones the Trenton police, screaming, "You can't imagine the horror of it. It's hell." At Grover's Mill, vigilantes are stalking the Martian invaders at Cranberry Street, hunting them with squirrel guns. Thinking they have found one, the gunmen begin blasting at a disused water tower that has stood in the village for years. By this point, only Wells's character and a stranger he has met survive. There are 7 minutes till the end of the broadcast.
Well, after parting with the artilleryman, I came at last to the Holland Tunnel, entered that silent tube, anxious to know the fate of the great city on the other side of the Hudson.
20 families evacuate a tenement block on Hedden Terrace, Newark. Wet flannels across their faces that they hope will deflect the Martian heat rays. St. Michael's Hospital in Newark is treating 15 men and women for shock. And in Pittsburgh, a man returns home to find his wife about to commit suicide. The play draws to its end. concluding with the Martians being destroyed by common bacteria. New York Police Headquarters send out an urgent teletype to all receivers. Station WABC informs us that the broadcast just concluded over that station was a dramatization of a play. No cause for alarm.
This is Orson Welles, ladies and gentlemen. Out of character, to assure you that the War of the Worlds has no further significance than as the holiday offering it was intended to be. The Mercury Theater's own radio version of dressing up in a sheet and jumping out of a bush and saying boo.
Back at CBS, the panic continues. Davidson Taylor bundles Wells and Houseman into a small back room where they will remain for an hour. More police have arrived at CBS and hundreds of reporters. Taylor clears the studio of all material relating to the show. Finally let out, Wells makes his way quickly to the Comedy Theatre, New York, for a nighttime rehearsal of Danton's death. They still have no idea of the impact of their Halloween stunt. John Houseman calls Howard Koch to tell him of the panic, but Koch is so tired he misses the call. The next morning, Koch goes out to his barber and finds a world in shock.
Catching ominous snatches of conversation with words like invasion and panic, I jumped to the conclusion that Hitler had invaded some new territory and that the war that we all dreaded had finally broken out.
The New York Times gives Koch the real story. 9 million people heard War of the Worlds. The New York Times had received 875 calls about the Martian invasion. Churches had held services of absolution, and callers in Providence asked the local power company to switch the town's lights off so they could hide from the invaders. Accused of being grossly irresponsible, Wells was an overnight sensation. Next day, he apologized, but drew attention to the 4-time CBS identified War of the Worlds as a fictional play throughout the hour. Asked if he regretted the realistic tone of the work, he said, "No, you don't play murder with soft words." News of the panic spread around the world. In Germany, Nazi newspaper Völkischer Beobachter blamed a Jewish conspiracy for the mayhem. 6 months later, on April the 28th, 1939, Adolf Hitler referred to it while deriding America's criticism of his aggression in Europe.
Der erste Erfolg ist, soweit es nicht den innerpolitischen Zwecken der demokratischen Regierungen dienen soll, die Verbreitung einer nervösen Hysterie, die im Lande der unbegrenzten Möglichkeiten zurzeit bereits die Landung vom Mars bewohnen zu mögen.
As a result of War of the Worlds, Orson Welles signed a contract with RKO in July 1939 and made his cinematic masterpiece, Citizen Kane. Howard Koch went on to win an Oscar in 1944 for his screenplay for Casablanca.
So goodbye, everybody, and remember, please, for the next day or so, the terrible lesson you learned tonight. That grinning, glowing, globular invader of your living room is an inhabitant of the pumpkin patch, and if your doorbell rings and nobody's there, that was no Martian, it's Halloween.
But it was not long before the Halloween hoax seemed more like a premonition of the real War of the Worlds. April 1983. In France, 41 Soviet diplomats and journalists are expelled for spying. In America, President Reagan has just announced plans for the Star Wars nuclear defense system. In Bolivia, former Nazi Klaus Barbie has been arrested and deported for war crimes. "8 a.m. Saturday, the 23rd of April. Magnus Linklater is an exhausted man. The 41-year-old features editor of the Sunday Times has been working all night, preparing the biggest story of his life. But Linklater needs to make an urgent phone call.
And I'll get it done.
60 miles away in Cambridge, the phone is answered by the 69-year-old master of the college.
Yes, it is.
Known as the Noble Refrigerator to his colleagues, Hugh Trevor Roper is Britain's most celebrated historian.
I see.
4 years ago, he was made Lord Dacre of Glanton by the Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher.
Yes, I am 100% convinced.
In 9 hours,
Right.
the newspaper's presses downstairs will be printing the biggest scoop the paper has ever had.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
The publication of the diaries of Adolf Hitler, written across the whole period of the Führer's reign between 1933 and 1945. They have never been published before. Surrounded by a mountain of research, Linklater is about to add a major contribution to history. The last 24 hours have been the most dramatic of his life. Yesterday morning, Hugh Trevor Roper completed 3,000 words for the Sunday Times on the discovery of the diaries. Trevor Roper is the leading authority on Hitler and the Third Reich. His authentication of the diaries is the key to their publication and promises to be the pinnacle of his career. A chemist in the Bad Ems forensic laboratory, Dr. Arnold Rentz, is completing final testing on an extremely sensitive case. Sworn to secrecy, Rentz has been asked to determine the age of some material from a recently discovered archive of Nazi documents, including 2 pages, allegedly, from Hitler's diaries. Cambridge, 9 a.m. A dispatch rider collects Trevor Roper's article, taking it to London and into history. After a week of frantic work, the historian can now relax.
Now don't forget, darling, we leave at 4.
He's looking forward to his own trip to London this evening to attend the Royal Opera in Covent Garden. 11:30 a.m. Dr. Rentz is worried. He has tested 3 items, 2 pages from the diaries and a telegram sent by Hitler to Mussolini. The latter appears to have been written on paper made after 1945. It indicates a forgery. This throws doubt on the whole archive of newly found material, including the diaries. Elsewhere, there is absolute conviction in favor of their authenticity. After all, Hugh Trevor Roper is the expert. 38 years ago, as an intelligence officer at the end of the Second World War, he was employed to certify the fate of Adolf Hitler. Amid stories of the dictator's escape to South America, Hugh Trevor Roper had delivered a detailed report in November 1945 describing Hitler's suicide on April the 30th. Though most famous for publishing his unique record of the last days of Hitler in 1947, Trevor Roper is also director of Times newspapers. He was back on the Führer's trail 2 weeks ago. Flown to Zurich at the request and expense of the Times newspaper group, Trevor Roper had been taken to a vault in the Swiss Handelsbank. His hosts were from Der Stern, a German magazine, who were buying the rights to the 60 volumes. At 3 in the afternoon, the historian was presented with Hitler's diaries. 3 experts had declared the handwriting genuine, but Trevor Roper still expected a wasted trip.
When I entered the back room in the Swiss bank and began to turn the pages of those volumes and learned the extraordinary story of their discovery, my doubts gradually dissolved.
At first glance, the diaries promised extraordinary insights. The Führer refers to SS leader Heinrich Himmler as this deceitful small animal breeder and complains that the little Dr. Goebbels is up to his old tricks again with women. On the conduct of the war in 1940, Hitler squirms, saying, "The English are worrying me. Shall I let them go or not? How will Churchill react?" Trevor Roper knew he had a very limited time to examine the books. Each carried the official red wax seal of the Third Reich and had a label declaring them to be the Führer's property. But Trevor Roper was not fluent in German, and he failed to notice that Hitler's initials on the covers were not in fact A.H., but F.H. He signed a confidentiality pledge and immediately confirmed authenticity to the Times.
Thank you.
A day later, the new owner of Times newspapers, Rupert Murdoch, entered a bidding war to buy the rights to the diaries. 3 days ago, on the 19th of April, Murdoch agreed to pay $1.2 million for the British and American rights. Publication would follow this weekend. Noon. Dr. Rentz types his report on the material he has tested. Though the diary pages could be the right age, he has only been able to inspect 2 and would not swear to authenticity. Two days before this week's paper is out, the lead story of the Sunday Times is yet to be decided. But the exasperated editor of the paper, Magnus Linklater's boss, is about to make an announcement.
We start doing Hitler's diaries at the next edition.
I thought the Times were getting.
No, the Stern will start to print on Monday, and Murdoch wants it out before that, so we've got it, so we'll have to get on with it.
Are you sure, Frank? We haven't got enough time to do our own work on this.
I know. I don't want to hear any more about that. The deal's been signed, and we're going to do it.
Linklater is convinced they're heading for a fall. 4 months ago, before Christmas, Linklater had been notified about the existence of the diaries by right-wing historian David Irving. It appeared the diaries were part of a huge Third Reich archive. The discovery of a German journalist, Gerd Heidemann. After further investigation, Irving concluded Heidemann was unreliable and that the whole collection was dangerously polluted with fakes. Linklater steered clear. The Berlin Wall divides Germany at this time, with East Germany controlled by the Soviet Union. There is a vibrant trade in Nazi memorabilia, but only through the secretive channels of the black market. The Soviet East German government has banned the export of artifacts made before 1945. With no chance for official checks, the number of forgeries is vast and uncontrolled.
I'm still nervous, man.
Magnus Linklater is familiar with literary hoaxes and had even written a book on the faking of Howard Hughes' autobiography 12 years ago.
We need to do our own checks on this, make sure everything's kosher.
In the office, Linklater's only ally is senior reporter Philip Knightley, who has shared his deep misgivings for the past week.
Have you got any objection if I put together some sort of memo, just detailing, just something just to cover our backs? Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
The Sunday Times has absolutely no idea of their actual source.
Everything's clear. Well, look, I'll do this memo. I'll run it by.
Gerd Heidemann had claimed he rescued the diaries from a location in East Germany and could not expose his sources for fear of arrest. 2 days ago, Knightley had written a memo drawing attention to a hoax very close to home. In 1957, Benito Mussolini's diaries had emerged, authenticated by historians and the Italian dictator's son. They were the work of an 84-year-old Italian forger. 11 years later, the Sunday Times bought 4 of the volumes for £100,000 and only recognized their folly at the last minute. Knightley had written, "The crux of the matter is that secrecy and speed work for the con man. To mount a proper check would protect us, but would not be acceptable to the vendor. We should insist on doing our own checks." "3 p.m. Hugh Trevor Roper is about to leave Cambridge for London. Philip Knightley calls, asking for reassurance.
Yes, speaking.
Oh, yes, I see.
Well, the one thing that impressed me most was the volume of the material. Could it all have been constructed from the imagination and from incidental sources? I decided that it could not. I know Hitler's handwriting. I know his signature. An operation of forgery on that scale would be heroic and unnecessary. The directors of Der Stern, I imagine, do not engage in forgery.
Ist meiner Meinung nach eine Fälschung.
But the German magazine is at this very moment facing a warning. In Koblenz, Dr. Renz gives another forensic scientist his worrying conclusions. Keen to push ahead with the scoop, Der Stern has agreed to further tests. But they won't happen till after German publication begins on Monday.
Bitte, auf Wiedersehen.
Only the journalist Gerd Heidemann, who has received over 5 million Deutschmarks to purchase the diaries, knows of their source. Der Stern invites the world's media to a massive press launch on Monday. The forensic results are not relayed to Rupert Murdoch in London. Meanwhile, 3 miles away at the Sunday Times, Linklater and his team have received a dossier of translated copies from the diaries.
As I sat down to read the intimate jottings of the Nazi leader, we were, in a sense, dealing with history in the raw. Here in this folder, we would learn at first hand whether Hitler had indeed formulated the final solution.
Instead of bristling rhetoric and revelation, Linklater is confronted with dull meanderings and trite, ordinary records.
Look at that.
We thought it was more like Peter Sellers doing a poor impersonation than an insight into the mind of the Führer.
The diary entries are childish and simplistic. Hitler writes off the 1944 assassination attempt on his life with, "Haha, isn't it laughable? This scum, these loafers and good-for-nothings. These people were bunglers." And of Himmler, he petulantly says, "I will show this unfathomable little penny pincher with his lust for power what I am really like." A tough night is ahead. Linklater's epic task begins with the story behind the diaries themselves. 20th of April, 1945. Adolf Hitler's 56th birthday. Germany was almost defeated, and the Russians were close to Berlin. The Führer ordered his staff to pack up his own possessions for safe removal from Berlin to Bavaria. 10 planes flew out of Berlin that night, carrying personal records belonging to the Führer. One of the planes was shot down on the treacherous journey, crashing and exploding in Bonersdorf near Dresden. In that plane were all my private archives that I had intended as a testimony for posterity. It is a catastrophe, stormed Adolf Hitler. 9 days later, the Führer committed suicide. In 1982, Gerd Heidemann declared that Hitler's diaries had survived, languishing in a hay barn for 37 years. There was no explanation as to why they had never been revealed before, or how they survived the burning plane back in 1945. There had been no forensic evidence. No surviving Nazi had ever mentioned Hitler keeping a diary. And in fact, it was understood Adolf Hitler hated writing by hand. The palsy he suffered as a result of Parkinson's disease would have made writing physically uncomfortable for the Führer. Trevor Roper is suddenly questioning why no German academic has been allowed to see the material. He is also wondering how the 60 volumes could have reappeared so suddenly. The historian is panicking. His reputation now rests entirely on his authentication of the diaries. Magnus Linklater is also worried. The material he's working with is so banal, he can hardly believe it was written by the most notorious leader in world history. Proper investigation would have also revealed that the diaries contained factual mistakes Adolf Hitler could not have made about his own life. The Sunday headline on the front of the paper will read, "The Secrets of Hitler's War," and 8 columns will cover the front page with the sensation.
James, I need that copy on my desk in 5, okay?
Linklater's team have nearly finished the piece.
Want more colour in the Rudolph Hess piles? 10 minutes.
Yeah.
10 minutes, okay?
Okay.
The front page reads, "Historians and commentators were sharply divided between those who were ready to believe the diaries were the biggest discovery since the Dead Sea Scrolls, and those who considered the collection to be a massive forgery." Everything rests on the authentication of the paper's key expert, Q. Trevor Roper. Nine hours before the presses start printing tomorrow's paper, and the world awaits the greatest exclusive the Sunday Times has ever had. Today's edition of the Times carries Hugh Trevor Roper's essay of endorsement, and the chance to halt tomorrow's publication of the diaries is rapidly disappearing.
And I'll get it done. Hello?
Hello, yes, Lord Dacre.
Magnus Linklater wants to hear for himself that his task has not been in vain.
I'm really sorry to call you so early, but
Trevor Roper refuses to admit his growing fears to a junior editor.
I know we've gone over this 1,000 times, but are you sure of the authenticity of the diaries?
Yes, I am 100% convinced. Or put it this way, I'm 99.9% convinced.
Right.
Magnus Linklater will soon realize the vast difference between 100% and 99.9%.
Okay, well, thank you.
Very good.
Hugh Trevor Roper is convinced he has made a fool of himself. He picks up the Morning Times to be confronted with his authentication essay spread across 6 columns. His gloom and embarrassment deepen.
The hitherto accepted idea that after his release from prison he had stopped writing by hand is a myth. In fact, we must envisage him every night after he had apparently gone to bed, sitting down to write his daily record. Clear-sighted though he could be, Hitler was never one to yield to inconvenient evidence.
Magnus Linklater has heard the authentication with his own ears. He starts to relax. In spite of previous anxieties, he and his team are delighted with the craftsmanship of their work.
I've changed the last 3 pars on this, I think.
Last-minute changes are discussed with Philip Knightley and the job is almost done.
Did you just speak to the old man again? Yes, just now on the phone. He seems quite happy. Right. Fine.
8:30 a.m. Hugh Trevor Roper is desperate to stop the Sunday Times printing the diaries.
Oh, hello.
He feels he can only talk to the most senior figures at the newspaper.
Oh, Mr. Murdoch's office? I'd like to speak to Mr. Murdoch, please. It's Lord Dacre. Dacre! No, well, where is he, do you know? I need to speak to him most urgently. Well, I see, thank you.
Instead of contacting Linklater direct, he calls Charles Douglas Hume, the editor of the Times.
Charles, it's Dacre. It's about the Hitler diaries. I've decided that I'm going to have to withdraw my validation. What? Well, I've decided I have to do it.
For some reason, Douglas Hume never passes on the message to the Sunday Times. For the next 10 hours, the newspaper will push on towards its ultimate humiliation.
Yes. Thank you, Charles.
The presses downstairs are printing 1.4 million copies of tomorrow's edition of the Sunday Times. The Secrets of Hitler's War is a headline none of them will ever forget. The first copies have been sent up to the editorial office. This is the moment of triumph, in spite of the cynical reports from other newspapers that the diaries are fake.
They're all going to jump up and down on that bloody question. Christ, let them! We could splash this for weeks.
Joining Frank Giles for a celebration drink, Linklater and Knightley are aware of the challenge from other papers.
We could get Dacre on it again. That's a good idea. Firm things up. Could work. Next week, a rebuttal in black and white.
Frank Giles decides to phone their key expert, the man who has made publication possible and reliable.
Hello, Hugh. It's Frank here. Yeah. Look, the Observer doing a piece on this authenticity angle. And I just wondered if you'd like to do a scholarly, detailed piece rebutting. What was that, Hugh? Yeah, I know, Hugh. We all have our doubts from time to time. Oh, but Hugh, surely your doubts are not strong enough to make you do a complete 180-degree turnabout? Oh, I see. You are doing a 180-degree turnabout.
Hugh Trevor Roper is the linchpin of their scoop. Trevor Roper feels happier now. He has made an honest statement and will stick to it. He has been invited by Der Stern to attend their launch on Monday. He decides to make a clean break and tell the world his fears.
Well, I shouldn't worry about it anymore, my dear. You've done the right thing, and that's all that matters.
At the Sunday Times, the bad news is being relayed to Rupert Murdoch.
Murdoch says, publish.
When the Sunday Times appeared the next day, circulation went up by 60,000. At the Der Stern press conference in Berlin on Monday, Trevor Roper claimed the diaries could not be authenticated and that he was not supporting the publication. It was the beginning of the end. The Sunday Times would not print anything more of the diaries. Almost 2 weeks later, the final forensic tests were completed in Wiesbaden and Berlin, establishing what Dr. Renz had suggested almost a month ago. The paper in the diaries was laced with a chemical whitener that had not existed before 1955. The seals on the front of the diaries contained polyester, and the ink was not more than 12 months old. The Führer's inaccurate initials were cheap plastic. The forgery was confirmed. They were fakes. Within 3 weeks, a 45-year-old East German art forger, Konrad Kujau, admitted he had written all the diaries 5 years ago and had sold them with Gerd Heidemann to Der Stern. Both men were sent to prison for fraud in July 1985. Within a month, the reputation of the Sunday Times was in ruins, and in June, editor Frank Giles was fired by Rupert Murdoch. Magnus Linklater survived the embarrassment, eventually moving on to edit the Scotsman newspaper. Hugh Trevor Roper was a laughingstock. Plagued by the press, the peer was later forced to admit publicly, "It was my fault." Trevor Roper remained the master of Peterhouse College in Cambridge for another 4 years and died in 2003. His reputation was never restored. Adolf Hitler remains the most mysterious and demonized figure of the 20th century. Though more than 1,000 books have been written about the dictator, the world has no record of the day-to-day thoughts of the mind that ruled Germany for 12 years, instigated the Holocaust, and started a war that led to 56 million deaths.